Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The barrel of the gun pressed against Cashin's temple was cold, but the hand holding it was terrifyingly warm, steady, and familiar. "Did you really think you could run from me, uncle?" The voice was silk wrapped around a razor blade, low, amused, and dripping with a dark, possessive hunger that made the air in the penthouse thick enough to choke on. Cashin Vane, a man who had slaughtered entire hit squads with a combat knife in silence, found himself frozen, kneeling on the plush carpet of the very tower he had helped build. He looked up, his breath hitching in his scarred throat. Standing above him was no longer the weeping boy he had abandoned 5 years ago in the ring. Julian Thorne had grown. He was a monolith of lean muscle and tailored darkness, his eyes burning with a chaotic mix of betrayal and adoration. The boy was gone, the predator remained. And Cashin knew, with a sinking fatality in his gut, that he wasn't going to die tonight. No, Julian had a fate far worse than death planned for the bodyguard who broke his heart. The silence in the room was louder than the thunder rattling the floor-to-ceiling windows. Outside, the skyline of Viridia's city bled neon red and blue into the storm, but inside, the world had narrowed down to the distance between a kneeling man and his executioner. Cashin Vane was 38 years old, his body a tapestry of scars earned in the service of the Thorne crime syndicate. He was the shield, the ghost, the legend whispered in the underworld. He was also the man who had raised Julian Thorne since the boy was 10, stepping in when the old Don, Julian's father, had been gunned down in a rival turf war. Cashin had been the father figure, the protector, the uncle, in everything but blood. But lines had blurred. They had blurred so slowly Cashin hadn't noticed until he was already drowning. "Put the gun down, Julian," Cashin said, his voice rough, like gravel grinding against steel. He didn't fear the bullet. He feared the trembling he could sense in Julian's aura, not from fear, but from the sheer effort of restraining a violent impulse. Julian laughed, a dark, hollow sound. He tilted his head, his black hair falling over eyes that shone with a manic intelligence. He didn't lower the weapon. Instead, he pressed it harder, forcing Cashin's head back, exposing the vulnerability of his throat. "You don't give orders anymore, Cashin," Julian whispered, leaning down until their faces were inches apart. "You forfeited that right the night you packed your bags and left me sleeping. You left a 19-year-old boy to inherit a kingdom of wolves alone. Do you have any idea what I had to become to survive without you?" Cashin closed his eyes. The guilt was a physical weight, heavier than the tactical vest he used to wear. "I left to save you, Julian." "Liar," Julian hissed, the word striking like a lash. He withdrew the gun, not to holster it, but to pistol whip Cashin across the cheekbone. It wasn't a killing blow, but a humiliating one. Cashin's head snapped to the side, a bloom of heat spreading across his face. He tasted copper. He could have disarmed Julian in a heartbeat. Muscle memory screamed at him to sweep the leg, twist the wrist, neutralize the threat. But he didn't move. He took the hit. He felt he deserved it. "I left," Cashin said, spitting blood onto the pristine carpet, "because of the way you started looking at me." The room went deathly still. This was the rot at the center of their history. The forbidden. The taboo. 5 years ago, Julian hadn't just looked at Cashin as a protector. The hero worship had twisted into something obsessive. Touches that lingered too long after training sessions. Glances across the dinner table that were too intense for a ward to give his guardian. Cashin had seen the storm coming. He was a servant, a weapon, and, in the eyes of society, an older relative figure. To indulge Julian's growing infatuation would have been a betrayal of the late Don and a corruption of the boy's future. So, Cashin had done the only noble thing he knew. He vanished. "I looked at you," Julian murmured, holstering the gun and walking around Cashin, circling him like a shark. "Like you were the only thing in the world that mattered. And you looked at me like I was a disease. I looked at you like a son." Cashin lied, though his voice cracked. Julian stopped in front of him again. He reached out, grabbing a handful of Cashin's graying hair, yanking his head back to force eye contact. "Look at me now, Cashin. Do you see a son? Do you see a child?" Cashin was forced to look. He saw the sharp jawline, the broad shoulders beneath the black silk shirt, the dangerous charisma that commanded an empire. He saw a man who had conquered the underworld to fill the void Cashin had left. And, God help him, Cashin felt that old, buried spark ignite in his chest. A spark he had tried to extinguish with whiskey and distance for 5 years. No, Cashin admitted, his voice barely a whisper. I see the dawn. Good. Julian released him, stepping back to pour a glass of amber liquid from a crystal decanter. Because you're not my uncle. We share no blood. You were my employee. And as of tonight, you are reinstated. But the terms of your employment have changed. Cashin wiped his lip. I'm not coming back to the life, Julian. I'm done with the killing. Oh, you're not here to kill, Julian said, taking a sip, his eyes analyzing Cashin's kneeling form with possessive delight. You're here to be kept. You spent 18 years guarding my body. It's only fair that my body now decides what happens to yours. The ultimatum hung in the air. Cashin stood up slowly, his joints popping. He was taller than Julian, broader, but he felt small. And if I refuse? Julian smiled, and it was the smile of Lucifer before the fall. Then I burn down the orphanage you've been anonymously funding in Sector 4. I know everything, Cashin. I know where you slept, what you ate, and who you spoke to every day of these 5 miserable years. You belong to me. You always have. Cashin stared at him, horror warring with a twisted sense of relief. Julian had monitored him. Julian had watched him. He had never been free. Fine, Cashin said, his shoulders slumping in defeat. I'm yours. The transition back into the Thorn estate was seamless on the surface, but violently turbulent underneath. The staff, faces new and unfamiliar, whispered as Cashin walked the halls. They knew the legend of the White Wolf, the man who had vanished. But they didn't understand the leash he was now on. Julian didn't assign him a room in the staff quarters. He moved Cashin into the master suite, into the adjoining room that was meant for a spouse. Safety protocols. Julian had sneered when Cashin protested. I need my shield close. But it wasn't about safety. It was about torment. For weeks, Julian played a psychological game that frayed Cashin's nerves. He would summon Cashin to his study late at night, ostensibly to review security details for the upcoming summit with the triads. Cashin would stand at attention, reviewing perimeter layouts, while Julian sat in his leather chair, wearing nothing but a loose robe, watching Cashin's eyes rather than the blueprints. You're sweating, Cashin, Julian noted one night, the air conditioning humming uselessly against the heat in the room. It's warm in here, sir. Sir. Julian stood up, walking around the heavy oak desk. You used to call me Jules when I scraped my knees. That was a long time ago. Julian stopped behind him. Cashin could feel the heat radiating from the younger man. Julian's hand came up, tracing the line of Cashin's spine through his shirt. Cashin went rigid. Why didn't you ever take a lover, Cashin? Julian whispered into his ear. In 5 years. Not one woman. Not one man. What? Cashin stared straight ahead at the bookshelf, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. I was busy surviving. You were waiting, Julian corrected, his hand moving around to rest over Cashin's heart. Just like I was waiting. Julian, stop. Make me. The challenge hung there. It was a test of authority. In the past, Cashin would have scolded him, pinned him in a sparring match until the boy yielded. But the power dynamic had inverted. If Cashin touched him now, it wouldn't be discipline. It would be war. Julian's hand slid lower, dangerous and demanding. Do you know how many nights I imagined this? The great Cashin vein, unmade by the boy he tried to save. Cashin grabbed Julian's wrist, halting the movement. His grip was iron, a reminder of the strength he held back. This isn't a game, Julian. You are confusing gratitude and abandonment issues with love. Julian ripped his hand away, his eyes flashing with genuine hurt that quickly hardened into ice. You think this is about daddy issues? You think I want a father? He laughed, harsh and bitter. I have enough ghosts, Cashin. I want a partner. I want a soul that is as damned as mine so I don't have to burn alone. He turned his back on Cashin. Get out. Guard the door. Like the dog you insist on being. Cashin left, but the image of Julian's pained expression burned into his mind deeper than any brand. The breaking point came 2 months later, during the night of the long knives, the anniversary of the old Don's death. The Thorn family was hosting a gala at the Obsidian Hotel. It was a power move, a display of dominance to the rival syndicates. Cashin was on high alert, his earpiece buzzing with chatter, his eyes scanning the crowd of socialites and killers in tuxedos. He stayed close to Julian. Julian looked ethereal in a white suit that contrasted sharply with Cashin's all-black tactical formal wear. Julian ignored him, laughing with the daughter of a Russian oligarch, playing the part of the charming playboy prince. Cashin felt a hot, ugly coil of jealousy tighten in his gut. He knew it was irrational. He knew it was possessive. But seeing Julian's hand on someone else's waist made him want to break fingers. Focus, he told himself. You are the shield. The attack didn't come from the entrance. It came from the service corridors. Glass shattered. The chandeliers swayed. A gunshot cracked through the ambient jazz, and chaos erupted. Secure the VIP. Cashin roared into his comms, drawing his weapon in one fluid motion. 3 men in waitstaff uniforms dropped their trays and pulled submachine guns. Cashin was moving before they fully raised their barrels. He put 2 bullets in the chest of the first attacker, vaulted over a table, and tackled Julian to the floor just as a spray of bullets decimated the ice sculpture behind them. Stay down, Cashin barked, shielding Julian's body with his own. Cashin, Julian yelled, not in fear, but in shock. More gunfire. The room was a kill zone. Cashin dragged Julian behind the marble bar, checking the magazine of his pistol. 3 hostiles down. Unknown number remaining. We need to move to the extraction point. The service elevator, Julian said, his eyes wide but clear. It's closer. Move. Now, they ran. Cashin was a whirlwind of violence, clearing the path. He shot a man emerging from the kitchen, kicked a door open, and shoved Julian into the hallway. But as they reached the elevator, the heavy steel doors pinged open. A heavy enforcer from the rival Viper clan stepped out, leveling a shotgun. There was no time to aim. No time to think. Cashin threw himself in front of Julian. The boom of the shotgun was deafening. Cashin felt like he'd been hit by a freight train. The buckshot tore into his left shoulder and side, spinning him around. He hit the wall, sliding down, blood instantly soaking his shirt. No! Julian's scream was raw, tearing through his throat. The enforcer pumped the shotgun, grinning. But before he could fire again, Julian moved. He didn't run. He didn't hide. He lunged for Cashin's fallen gun. The movement was faster than anything Cashin had ever taught him. It was pure instinct. Julian fired 3 times, 1 to the chest, 1 to the neck, 1 to the head. The enforcer dropped. Silence returned, heavy and ringing. Julian dropped the gun and fell to his knees beside Cashin. His white suit was stained with Cashin's blood. The composure, the arrogance, the mask of the Don, it all shattered. Cashin, look at me. Look at me. Julian's hands were shaking as he pressed them against the ruin of Cashin's shoulder. Cashin blinked, his vision graying at the edges. The pain was distant, masked by shock. He looked up at Julian's face, streaked with tears, terrified, open. It was the face of the boy he loved. I got him. Cashin wheezed, blood bubbling past his lips. You're safe. I don't care about being safe. Julian sobbed, pressing harder, trying to keep the life inside Cashin's body. I need you. You stupid, stubborn old man. Don't you dare die on me. That is an order. Julian. Cashin reached up with his good hand, his blood-stained fingers brushing Julian's cheek. You've grown. So strong. Stay with me, Julian begged, resting his forehead against Cashin's chest. I'll stop. I'll stop the games. I'll stop the threats. Just stay. Cashin's eyes fluttered shut. I never wanted to leave. Darkness took him. Waking up was a slow, agonizing process. The smell of antiseptic and expensive cologne filled his nose. Cashin opened his eyes. He wasn't in a hospital. He was in the master bedroom of the Thorne estate, hooked up to a private medical array. His shoulder was bandaged heavily, his chest aching with every breath. He turned his head. Julian was sitting in a chair next to the bed, asleep. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, still wearing the blood-stained white trousers from the gala, though his shirt was changed. He was holding Cashin's hand. Cashin squeezed his fingers weakly. Julian's eyes snapped open instantly. The predator was awake. You're alive? Julian breathed, the relief washing over him so intensely he almost collapsed. Takes more than a shotgun, Cashin rasped. Julian didn't smile. He stood up and leaned over the bed, his expression hardening again, though his eyes remained wet. Do you know who sent them? Cashin shook his head. I did. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Cashin stared at him. What? I leaked the security details to the Vipers, Julian said, his voice void of emotion, though his hands were trembling. I knew they would attack. I had snipers positioned to take them out if they got too close, but I needed to know. You risked your life. Cashin struggled to process the insanity of it. To test me? No, Julian whispered, leaning down until their foreheads touched. To break you. I needed to know if you were just doing a job, or if you would still die for me. A employee runs. A lover bleeds. You're insane. Cashin breathed, horror mixing with awe. You could have died. I could have died. I would rather die with you than live another day watching you serve me like a stranger, Julian confessed, his voice cracking. I am a monster, Cashin. You made me this way when you left. Now, you have to live with it. Cashin looked into those dark, abyss-like eyes. He saw the madness, the manipulation, the sheer, unadulterated need. It was toxic. It was wrong. It was everything he had tried to protect the boy from. But the boy was dead. The monster was here. And Cashin was the monster's keeper. He realized then that he had never really been the dominant one. Even when Julian was a child, Cashin had been wrapped around his finger. The power dynamic had always been an illusion. Julian was the gravity. Cashin was just the object caught in orbit. Cashin sighed, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a surrender that felt like coming home. He moved his hand, sliding it to the back of Julian's neck, pulling him down. You foolish child, Cashin whispered. Say it, Julian demanded, his breath hot against Cashin's lips. Say you're mine. I'm yours, Cashin vowed, closing the distance. God help me, I'm yours. The kiss tasted of iron and tears, a seal on a pact that could only end in blood. The viper had indeed tamed the wolf, not with chains, but by showing him that they were both beasts of the same dark forest. And that is how the viper tamed the wolf. If you enjoyed seeing Julian take absolute control over his protector, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you forgive a lover who orchestrated a murder attempt just to prove your love? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then, prompt image. Prompt, masterpiece, best quality, high-res. 1.2. Korean manhwa style, semi-realistic, digital art. 2 men, BL, Yaoi, man 1. Young adult, mid-20s, black hair, sharp jawline, intense dark eyes, wearing unbuttoned white silk shirt stained with blood, expression of desperate possessiveness, leaning over. Man 2. Older man, mid-30s, muscular build, scars on visible skin, lying in a luxurious bed, bandages on shoulder and chest, heavy stubble, silver gray, eyes looking up with surrender. Background is a dark, luxurious bedroom, medical equipment and shadow, rain on window, cinematic lighting, dramatic atmosphere, emotional tension, intricate details.